You had such promise. You could have been my successor, my equal. But now... But I may still have some small use for you.
Greetings, wise acolytes of the galaxy, and welcome back to our infinite archives. Once again, we return with a holocron of legacy pertaining to a character who many know quite well. Galen Marek, also known as Vader's secret prodigy, Starkiller. Since his debut, Starkiller placed himself on every Star Wars fan's map due to his godlike way he wielded the Force. Never before have we seen a Force-sensitive completely Hulk out like Galen Marek does, as we've seen his legendary feats in the Force put other icons to shame. We talked before about exactly why Galen Marek is so powerful, which was due to his huge potential in the Force, and he was taught by Vader to use 100% of it at once, 100% of the time. Well, today, my holocron scholars, we are going to take a look at Starkiller's cap and his potential in the Force, and compare it to some of the greats in Star Wars lore to see exactly how well he matches up. Naturally, our scale of comparison is in the higher end of things, starting with Jedi-like council members and capping it off with a full potential Anakin. With this perspective, let's break down exactly how powerful a full potential Starkiller might be. For this holocron, we will be including Starkiller's clone in the collective sense when we refer to Starkiller. Our reason is that we believe that while Galen's clone was created specifically to have more power, the clone's power was still well within the scope of Galen's overall potential, if that makes sense. So we will be lumping in the clone's achievements in that of which the original Starkiller was able to attain as well, only for simplicity's sake. To jump right into it, Starkiller's power is shown to be basically on par with Vader's, and when he's going all out, it seems to somewhat eclipse Vader's potential. In fact, even Darth Sidious grew worried about Galen's potential in the Force, and stated himself that it was possible for Starkiller's power to one day rival his own. We know that Darth Sidious is a very proud man, so if Galen had the potential to surpass him, we aren't sure whether or not Sidious would actually admit to this. Having said that, Sidious was no fool either. When he believed that someone posed a great threat to him, he took no time to ensure their elimination. This is what we see from Sidious when he visits Maul and Savage on Mandalore. While Darth Sidious is extremely proud, he hardly ever fails to appreciate true strength, going so far as to shower it with praise when he sees it. Of course, the Emperor's praise is usually and swiftly followed up with ruthless action. This was why Sidious doesn't praise people lightly unless he intends to manipulate them. And when he says this, he isn't actively trying to manipulate Starkiller, which means that it is genuine praise. That's actually something that I want to address really quick that I find incredibly interesting. Sidious never actually made a genuine attempt to manipulate Starkiller or try to gain his allegiance. He knew that Vader had raised Galen to hate him and to possibly even overthrow him, so the boy was already brainwashed far beyond even Sidious. However, Sidious didn't even try to turn that towards his favor like he did with Luke. Rather, he tried his best to simply wipe Galen out as fast as possible, not even wanting to give him the opportunity to overthrow the Emperor. I think this is another clue to testify not only about the strength of Galen and Starkiller, but it also backs up the Emperor's statement about his powers. Of course, that's not to say that the Emperor didn't think of Luke in the same way. My belief is that Sidious viewed Luke as much more malleable and impressionable compared to the hard-trained Sith assassin. Unfortunately, as far as we know, the Emperor is silent on his thoughts about Luke's own potential, but it is likely that he anticipated the son of Skywalker to replace what Sidious had intended Vader to be. Anyway, back to Starkiller. We can't just take into account one man's opinion on Starkiller, but we have to observe the fruits of the assassin's labors, and compare it to what we know of the greats. We'll use Grandmaster Luke here for example, and as a main rubric, because it's the closest thing we have to observing a full potential Anakin. Both Grandmaster Luke and Starkiller express powers that are similar in scale. Galen regularly was able to stop TIE fighters in flight path and throw them around like toys. Likewise, Luke once toppled an entire AT-AT with one force push. Starkiller would decimate legions of enemies at a time by using the dark side in huge bursts of force repulses, lightsaber skills, and chaining electricity through his attacks. By the time of the Yuzhong Vong War, Luke was able to do much of the same as he had mastered being able just to sink into the Force until he became the literal embodiment of a force of nature with his blade. Luke too used a deadly amount of his Jedi Emerald Lightning. Starkiller did yank an entire Star Destroyer out of space, though with an incredible amount of effort, but by contrast, Luke was able to hold open a black hole and still use the Force in other ways at the same time. He was also able to use the Force to cloak an entire fleet of ships from view. I want to take this moment to point out that illusions and telekinesis aren't mutually exclusive in terms of how much force power has to be exerted to complete them. Galen was able to cover one vessel using all of his power, and Luke was able to cover a fleet of vessels with some strain, but eventually learned how to do it without strain. I think the difference here is clear, but so much in raw power. Luke devoted himself entirely to the study and control of the Force. His technique is far superior to Starkiller's and thus augmented his raw potential output. Starkiller was more or less all raw power. He could whip the dark side around like the best of them, but he lacked any sort of training and greater mysteries when it came to meditation or seeking the mystical sides of the Force. Starkiller, by his own admittance, was never truly able to learn from the light side as much as he did from the dark. We did a video all about why Starkiller was so terrified of Yoda when he met the former Grandmaster on Dagobah. Though Galen didn't know who Yoda was, he could still tell that he was extremely powerful with the light side due to how close the green creature was able to remain at the dark side cave and Nexus without being affected by it. Galen had a difficult time understanding the light side, since all he knew about the Force was combat and death rather than the entire side of life to it. But what would happen if Galen Merrick actually mastered and grasped the true gifts of the light side? Here is my assessment. I truly believe that Starkiller would be a lot like Revan, who mastered both light and dark. However, I believe he would be slightly more powerful. To put it in terms of numbers, let's say that Vader is an 8, Sidious, Revan, and Yoda are 9s, and Grandmaster Luke Skywalker or full potential Anakin is a 10. I believe that Starkiller, at max potential, would be something like a 9.5, right in the middle. Here is why. When Sidious said that Galen had the potential to be his equal, Sidious was only taking into account the dark side of the Force. Remember, Sidious thought that the dark side was pretty much the only side that mattered, so he wouldn't have acknowledged the possibility of Galen trying to use the light. Had Galen Merrick learned the light side of the Force and then got up to his max level, he would be right up close to the level of the Chosen One, but just a few steps shy. We have to remember that in the very development of the Force Unleashed games, the developers were asking the question, what would it look like if Luke Skywalker was an agent of the dark side and trained by Vader from birth? The answer to that very question is Starkiller. Now obviously, canonically, we cannot place him above somebody like Grandmaster Luke or a full potential Anakin, but that is the baseline of where the character was conceived in the first place. He would be much like a Revan, but if Revan attained the power of someone perhaps like a Valkorian. This is just my perspective as of how I would rank them, but of course, I want to hear all of your thoughts on this matter. Unfortunately, we do not see a full potential Starkiller, so it is all conjecture at this point in time. But still, what do you think of a max potential Starkiller, and who do you think he may compare to? Even though this holocron has to have a lot of assumption-based reasoning, do you agree with our assumptions? Let us know in the comments down below, and as always my friends, may the Force be with you, and have a great day.